The district and circuit courts both use the moment of threat rule, meaning that in this case, the court looked only at the 2 seconds between the officer jumping on the door sill and pulling the trigger. Held that a law enforcement officer used excessive force during a stop or arrest is analyzed under the Fourth Amendment, which requires that the force deployed be objectively reasonable from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene. The perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene. What about the perspective of a reasonable subject at the scene? Would a person who's been pulled over for a toll violation consider it reasonable for the officer to reach for his sidearm? While the subject was rummaging through his stuff, the officer having his hand on his weapon would be reasonable. But after that, that is why the totality of circumstance is so important to the analysis of reasonableness. The inquiry into the reasonableness of police force requires analyzing the totality of the circumstances. That analysis demands careful attention to the facts and circumstances relating to the incident. In other words, police use of force does not happen in a vacuum. Everything in the encounter leading up to the use of force is important to the analysis. In this case, the court should not have looked solely at the moment before Officer Felix fired the shots, but his actions beforehand and the actions of the driver. Was Officer Felix's life in danger because of what Barnes had done or because of what he himself had done? Was the action of driving away from a traffic stop really worth Barnes's life? The recognition of this need to look at the totality of the circumstances is very important. For example, if a person shoves a police officer, that could be considered assault, justifying the use of force to detain the subject. However, if the officer initiated contact, say by intentionally walking into someone, then it's not an assault on a police officer, but a person defending themselves from assault. The decision of the circuit court was vacated, and the case was remanded back for further review. Whether the court finds the use of force reasonable or not, hopefully they will use the right standard for doing so.